Some photos were too hot for their time, banned, buried, or nearly erased from history. But they told the truth about fame, control, and rebellion in old Hollywood. From scandalous pinups to leaked lingerie shots, these images weren't just shocking. They were dangerous. What made them so controversial? And why are they still talked about today? Stay with us as we reveal the 20 most jaw-dropping vintage photos you were never supposed to see. Marilyn Monroe, the nude that changed everything. Before Marilyn Monroe became a global icon, she was just Norma Jean, an aspiring actress trying to pay the bills. In 1949, desperate for cash, she posed nude for a calendar under a fake name. At the time, it was just a survival move. But by 1952, that photo came back to haunt and define her. The calendar resurfaced just as she was rising to fame. Studios panicked. Publicists scrambled. But Marilyn? She didn't lie. "I was hungry," she said. "That's all." That one sentence changed everything. Instead of denying it, she owned it. And with that choice, Marilyn flipped the power dynamic. The photo, which could have ruined her, became part of her myth. Vulnerable, honest, and completely in control of her image. The press tried to scandalize it, but fans embraced her. That soft light, red velvet photo became one of the most reprinted nudes of all time. Not because it was graphic, but because it was real. It was the moment the world saw Marilyn not just as a body, but as a woman surviving on her own terms. And it wasn't the last time a photo would challenge America's comfort zone, because next came a woman whose leather and lace sparked a Senate investigation. Betty Page, the queen of pinups, banned bondage shoots. If Marilyn whispered, Betty Page screamed. With jet black bangs and a smile that made sin look sweet, Betty became the face of the underground pinup scene. Her photos were playful, provocative, and sometimes deeply controversial, especially the bondage-themed sets she did with photographer Irving Klaw in the 1950s. Betty wasn't just posing in lingerie. She was tied up, spanked, gagged, and photographed in suggestive positions. Some saw art. Others saw obscenity. The U.S. Senate didn't hesitate. Her work was cited in obscenity hearings. Klaw was investigated. And Betty? She vanished, just as she was becoming a legend. Despite the moral panic, there was something in those photos that couldn't be ignored. She didn't look scared or ashamed. She smiled, winked, and leaned in. That confidence made her an icon, not just for men, but for women who saw her as someone owning her sexuality in a repressed era. Years later, she said, "I never thought I was doing anything wrong." And history agrees. Betty Page became the mother of alternative modeling, influencing generations. But if Betty brought bondage into the shadows, the next woman brought a scandal into the spotlight, right at the side of another star. Jane Mansfield, the wardrobe malfunction that wasn't. It was 1957. The place? A Beverly Hills party. The guests? A-list stars, including Italian goddess Sophia Loren. But the photo the world would remember forever captured Jane Mansfield leaning in, cleavage spilling out, while Sophia glared sideways with barely concealed horror. The image became iconic overnight. But here's the twist. It wasn't an accident. Jane knew exactly what she was doing. Her dress was cut so low it practically defied gravity. She posed at just the right angle. And the photographers? They knew gold when they saw it. Newspapers blurred the image. Catholic groups called it indecent. Editors were torn between outrage and profit. But the damage, or rather the marketing, was done. Jane once joked, "A 40-inch bust and a lot of perseverance will get you more than a cup of coffee. A lot more." She wasn't just a blonde bombshell. She was a master of attention. And that photo blurred the line between scandal and strategy. It wasn't about nudity. It was about control. Jane was selling an image the world couldn't resist. And while Jane shocked the world at the surface, the next woman used her image to sell war and carry it on her shoulders. Mamie Van Doren, Hollywood's wild blonde. Before Madonna, before Pamela Anderson, there was Mamie Van Doren, Hollywood's wild blonde, and proud of it. With platinum hair, killer curves, and a wardrobe that barely existed, Mamie turned her sexuality into a brand. She wasn't interested in playing wholesome roles. Her photos were intentionally risque. Tight dresses, cleavage, barely there swimsuits. She appeared in men's magazines, pin-up spreads, and military posters. She once said, "I wasn't going to play the sweet virgin when I wasn't one." Mamie's photos were passed around in barracks, hidden in lockers, and stuck on walls across the world. But she wasn't just eye candy. She was a marketing machine. She knew the power of the camera. She knew the rules and how to break them. She rejected the good girl image studios tried to push. Instead, she leaned into desire, posing provocatively at a time when even showing a garter strap could get you banned. But she wasn't scandalized. She was smart. She sold controversy. Behind the glamour was a woman building her own brand before it became common. And while Mamie played the game to win, the next woman lost everything, simply for showing her true self on screen. Hedy Lamarr, beauty, brains, and a banned bath scene. Before she co-invented the technology behind Wi-Fi, Hedy Lamarr made history for something else. Being the first woman to appear in a non-pornographic film completely nude. It was 1933. The film was Ecstasy. Hedy, only 18 at the time, appeared in a bathing scene that shocked the world. More controversial was a moment where her face expressed, quite clearly, sexual pleasure. It was one of the first depictions of female orgasm on screen. The Catholic Church condemned it. The film was banned in the US, and Hedy was forever branded as that woman from Ecstasy. She fled Europe for Hollywood, hoping to escape the scandal. But the photos still followed her, used to sell perfume, magazines, and tabloid headlines. "Any girl can be glamorous," she later said. "All you have to do is stand still and look stupid." But she was anything but stupid. She was a brilliant inventor whose ideas helped develop secure communications, tech that led to Bluetooth and GPS. Still, Hollywood saw only her body. The bath scene, frozen in time, defined her to millions. It was the price of being beautiful and being first. And next, we meet a woman whose beauty was so powerful, it stirred outrage from the Vatican. Elizabeth Taylor, the cleavage that shook the Vatican. It was 1953. Elizabeth Taylor, only 21 at the time, stepped onto the Cannes red carpet wearing a white dress that hugged her every curve. It was elegant, yes, but also unapologetically sensual. The neckline plunged low, and the world gasped. That single photo went everywhere. It wasn't just gossip magazines that took notice. The Vatican itself condemned the image, accusing Taylor of leading women into temptation. For a dress, for cleavage, for being young, stunning, and unafraid. But that moment cemented Elizabeth's status as more than just a movie star. She became a symbol of dangerous beauty, a woman whose sexuality could cause a global stir without even trying. Studios saw an opportunity. They leaned into the scandal, promoting her upcoming film Cleopatra with a mix of sensuality and imperial glamour. The image of Liz as an untouchable goddess was everywhere. But behind the camera, she was living through public heartbreaks, tabloid feuds, and a chaotic love affair with Richard Burton. Elizabeth later said, "I've always admitted that I'm ruled by my passions. The photo that shocked the Vatican was just the beginning. And while Elizabeth's photo sparked outrage in Rome, the woman in our next story caused a stir with just a single glance. At another woman's cleavage, Sophia Loren, the eyes that undressed Hollywood. It's one of the most famous candid shots in Hollywood history. The year was 1957. At a glitzy Beverly Hills party, Sophia Loren, Italy's reigning beauty queen, was seated next to Jane Mansfield, who, true to form, had shown up with a neckline defying gravity. Jane leaned in. Sophia looked down. Cameras flashed, and a moment was frozen forever. Sophia's side-eye became an instant classic. The press ran with it, calling it everything from shade to a silent war between elegance and excess. But Sophia never played into the drama. Years later, she reflected on the moment, saying simply, "I was afraid her dress was going to explode." While that photo made headlines, Sophia's own vintage images were never about shock. They were about control. She posed on beaches, in bed sheets, in silk gowns, but never gave away too much. Her photos smoldered without screaming. Her sex appeal was slow-burning and self-aware. Sophia Loren didn't need scandal to shine. She let others grab headlines while she built a legacy on her own terms. But while she protected her image carefully, the woman in our next story had her photo used for something far greater and far more haunting. Rita Hayworth, the pinup that went to war. She didn't ask to be a fantasy, but the world made her one anyway. In the early 1940s, Rita Hayworth became the most requested pinup girl of World War II. One image in particular became legendary. Rita, draped in a sheer black nightgown, hair cascading over her shoulders, lips parted just enough to make you stare and not stop. It wasn't vulgar. It wasn't obscene. It was longing made visual. That photo was copied and passed from soldier to soldier, taped inside lockers, folded into footlockers, pinned above bunks, and whispered over in foxholes across Europe and the Pacific. Rita became more than a movie star. She was a symbol of home, of hope, of something worth fighting for. But that image, like many from Hollywood's golden age, came at a price. Behind the seductive smile and the soft glow of studio lighting, Rita Hayworth was being worked to exhaustion, sculpted into an ideal she never had the freedom to define. The U.S. government used her to sell war bonds. Her face was painted on the side of planes, her legs stretched across recruiting posters. She became a national mascot for male desire, patriotism, and victory. But off-camera, she was struggling. Her private life was a storm. She married 5 times, including a turbulent union with director Orson Welles, and later, the Prince Ali Khan. None of them offered stability. Rita suffered deeply from anxiety, isolation, and betrayal. Not just by lovers, but by the system that turned her into a dream, then discarded her when the dream grew tired. She once said, "Men fell in love with Gilda, but they woke up with me." That quote, quiet but devastating, speaks to the chasm between fantasy and reality. The world wanted the woman in the poster. Rita was left with herself. As the war ended and soldiers returned home, the fantasy started to fade. Rita's star began to dim, not because she was any less radiant, but because the world had moved on to newer obsessions. The same beauty that lifted spirits across a war-torn world now boxed her in. She was typecast, emotionally worn down, and increasingly withdrawn from the spotlight. Her photos remain glossy, timeless, breathtaking, but they carry a weight. Behind every gaze, there's a woman trying to breathe through a life that never fully belonged to her. Rita Hayworth didn't just pose for a pinup. She became one, not by choice, but by demand. And when the dream collapsed, she was left standing in its shadow. But not every woman in Hollywood used curves or gowns to make her mark. The next starlet built an entire empire, using nothing more than her hair. That platinum wave wasn't just a look. It was a cultural weapon. Veronica Lake is next. Veronica Lake, hair, hips, and hidden scars. Veronica Lake didn't need to say a word. All she had to do was tilt her head and let that platinum wave fall over one eye. It was hypnotic, sensual, dangerous. That peekaboo hairstyle became a national obsession in the 1940s, and it made Veronica a star. But it also nearly destroyed her. The U.S. government asked her to change her hair during World War II because women were copying her look in factories and getting it caught in machinery. She agreed, reluctantly, and when her hair changed, so did the public's interest. In an effort to stay relevant, she posed in increasingly provocative photos. Sheer gowns, long legs on display, sultry stares aimed like bullets at the camera. But nothing could recapture the lightning. Behind the lens, she struggled with alcoholism, mental illness, and financial ruin. The same press that once worshipped her turned on her, labeling her difficult, washed up, and a problem. But her photos tell a different story. One of a woman who knew exactly how to use her image and paid dearly for it. And while Veronica fought for survival, our next star learned how to turn every photo into power. Joan Crawford, the smoldering starlet of studio portraits. Before the shoulder pads, before Mommy Dearest, before the legend, there was the young Joan Crawford, lounging in lace, furs, and lingerie, staring straight into the camera with eyes that refused to blink. In the 1920s, her studio portraits were unlike anything else. They weren't just sexy, they were strategic. Joan understood lighting, angles, shadow. She didn't just pose, she directed her image. Her early photos often flirted with censorship. She exposed shoulders, backs, even legs, risque at the time. She was sensual without being submissive, bold without being crass. And behind the glamour were whispers, affairs with men, close relationships with women, a determination to never be powerless again. As her fame grew, so did her legend. Her look evolved, but the intensity never faded. Joan once said, "I never go out unless I look like Joan Crawford, the movie star. If you want to see the girl next door, go next door." Her photos weren't just for male consumption, they were weapons, tools she used to climb from obscurity to royalty. And next, we meet a woman who stood barefoot, alone and untamed, and became one of the most unforgettable images in Hollywood history. Her name? Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner, the barefoot bombshell. There's something raw, rebellious, and irresistibly human about a woman standing barefoot in the sand, unfiltered, unapologetic, and untamed. And no one captured that spirit better than Ava Gardner. One of her most iconic images doesn't come from a studio portrait or a film still. It's a candid shot of Ava on a sun-drenched beach, wearing a sheer, wind-blown gown that clung to her curves as the ocean lapped at her ankles. Her hair was wild. Her gaze was steady. And the moment felt less like a pose and more like a challenge. In an era when studio-approved glamour meant control, restraint, and polish, this photo was too much, too free, too sensual, too alive. But Ava didn't flinch. "I was the world's mistress," she later said. "I never belonged to anyone." And that image captured it perfectly. An untouchable goddess who bowed to no one, not even the camera. Behind the lens, however, was a life filled with chaos. Ava's passionate and often violent romance with Frank Sinatra became tabloid obsession. MGM couldn't control her, no matter how hard they tried. She drank, she cursed, she danced barefoot in Havana nightclubs, and she ran from every cage Hollywood tried to build around her. And she let her photos reflect that same defiance. Unlike many actresses of her time, Ava didn't shrink herself to fit a mold. She posed in swimsuits that were too tight, gowns that were too sheer, and positions that suggested power, not submission. Her sexuality wasn't soft focus, it was sharp-edged. The press called her a wild woman, men called her dangerous, directors called her difficult, and yet no one could look away. She was never interested in being the girl next door. She didn't play cute, she didn't play nice, she played real, and that reality, messy, moody, magnetic, bled into every photo ever taken of her. There's a rare kind of woman who understands her power without needing permission to use it. Ava Gardner was that woman. Her photos weren't just beautiful, they were revolutionary. They pushed the boundaries of what Hollywood allowed a woman to be, and even decades later, they still carry the scent of rebellion. Ava didn't pose to titillate, she posed to claim space. She didn't smile for the camera, she dared it to capture her. And while Ava's fire scorched the shores of California and Havana alike, the next woman swept through Europe like a cultural tidal wave. She wore less, said more, and scandalized entire governments with a single bikini photo. She was blonde, barefoot, and born for controversy. Brigitte Bardot is next. Brigitte Bardot, France's gift to scandal. When Brigitte Bardot stepped onto the world stage in the 1950s, everything changed. She wasn't coy, she wasn't reserved. She was a bombshell who wore bikinis before they were legal in some countries, and she did it with a smile that dared you to look away. Her topless photos from the film And God Created Woman were banned in several countries. Her beach snapshots, carefree, sun-kissed, and seductive, were considered too provocative for American magazines. But to Bardot, it was all natural. "I have always adored being bare," she said. "It makes me feel free." Bardot wasn't just a symbol of sex. She was the face of a cultural revolution, the embodiment of free love, rebellion, and female autonomy. But that freedom came with a price. While the world consumed her images, the real Brigitte struggled. Depression, media harassment, and the weight of being a living fantasy wore her down. She would eventually retreat from fame altogether. Her photos live on as iconic, untamed declarations of desire and independence. And just before Bardot broke the mold, one woman shattered all the rules, long before it was safe to do so. Dressed in men's clothes, arm in arm with women, and never apologizing. Marlene Dietrich, the original androgynous icon. Marlene Dietrich didn't just pose, she provoked. She didn't seduce the camera, she confronted it. In the 1930s, when Hollywood clung to its ideas of femininity, soft, submissive, and safe, Dietrich arrived like a thunderstorm in a tuxedo. One of the most controversial images of her era shows her in full evening wear, cigarette dangling from her lips, framed by two women, commanding the room with absolute ease. It was more than a photo. It was a declaration. And America wasn't ready. That image got her banned in Boston, a city known for its conservative censorship. Religious groups called her morally dangerous. The press labeled her unnatural, indecent, and corrupting. But Marlene just smiled wider. She knew exactly what she was doing. "I dress for the image," she once said. "Not for myself, not for the public, not for fashion, not for men." Her androgyny wasn't a gimmick. It was a statement. Her photos bent gender expectations and shattered the binary long before society had the language to understand what she was doing. She played with power in her poses. One day she'd wear silk gowns and diamonds, the next tailored suits and fedoras. In every shot, she owned her body, her space, and her narrative. Off camera, Dietrich was just as daring. She was known to have affairs with both men and women: John Gilbert, Edith Piaf, Gary Cooper, and Mercedes de Acosta, to name a few. She never confirmed, never denied. She didn't need to. Her photos spoke louder than words. When the Nazis rose to power, they banned her films and stripped her of her citizenship because she refused to endorse the regime. Instead, she became an American citizen and entertained Allied troops during World War II, another move that made her not only bold, but political. In Hollywood, executives tried to soften her. They wanted her to conform, to sell tickets in Middle America. But Dietrich wouldn't bend. She leaned further into scandal, into seduction, into danger, into truth. She posed not to satisfy desire, but to define it. She played both sides of the camera, subject and storyteller, muse and master. Her vintage portraits weren't just provocative, they were blueprint. They blurred every line: male, female, dominant, submissive, hard, soft, sacred, taboo. They didn't predict the future, they demanded it. Marlene Dietrich didn't just influence fashion, she altered identity itself. And long before we called anyone a queer icon, she was one, without ever needing to explain why. Her images remain timeless, precisely because they defied time altogether. And speaking of time, our next woman defined her entire decade. She was the original it girl, the flapper queen with the fire of 1,000 rumors. And when her private photos leaked, they nearly destroyed her. Clara Bow is next. Clara Bow, the it girl's leaked photos. She was the face of the roaring 20s. Clara Bow, with her pouty lips, flapper fashion, and wild eyes, captured the sexual electricity of an entire generation. But fame for her came with a terrifying price. At the peak of her career, private lingerie and semi-nude photos of Clara began to circulate. Some were studio portraits. Others were reportedly taken at parties. Moments when she was vulnerable, off guard, possibly manipulated. The tabloids pounced. They painted her as wild, promiscuous, and dangerous. Stories of casting couch parties and being passed around only intensified the narrative. But the truth was far more tragic. Clara had been abused as a child. She was exploited by men in power long before the photos ever leaked. Fame didn't protect her. It exposed her. The public turned her into a sex object, and when they were done, they threw her away. Her mental health collapsed. She retired young. By her 30s, she was living in obscurity. Still, those photos remain complex, controversial, heartbreaking. They weren't just snapshots. They were proof of how cruel the spotlight can be. And while Clara faded into silence, the woman who ends our story gave one final image, raw, broken, and unforgettable. Hedy Lamarr, Redux, her mugshot and the myth. It was 1966. Hedy Lamarr, once the most beautiful woman in the world, was caught shoplifting. A mugshot was taken, hair unkempt, makeup faded, eyes tired. The photo shocked everyone. This wasn't the shimmering star of ecstasy or the siren of the silver screen. This was a woman aged by pain, betrayed by fame, and forgotten by the very system that once paraded her around like royalty. And yet, the photo was unforgettable. It was brutally human. Hedy, who had once stunned the world with her nude bathing scene, was now a symbol of Hollywood's harsh cycle. From adored to discarded, from star to scandal. But even in that image, there was something powerful. A woman still standing, still defiant, still real. It became a tragic mirror of what the industry does to the women it claims to love. Hedy once said, "Any girl can look glamorous. All she has to do is stand still and look stupid." But by the end, her truth was out, and it had nothing to do with glamour. She was brilliance in disguise, beauty misunderstood, and a photo never meant for the spotlight became her most honest one yet. These weren't just photos, they were battles for control, identity, and survival. Behind every flash was a deeper story. If this pulled back the curtain on Hollywood's hidden past, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. And remember, history always has a darker side.